to the prosecutor. Please continue with your presentation.
Your Honours. My name is Robin Croft and I will address two topics today. First, I will present on the contextual elements of crimes against humanity. And second, I will set out some of the prosecution's evidence on Mr. Duterte's individual criminal responsibility for the crimes alleged in this case. Turning first then to the contextual elements. Your Honours, the contextual elements of crimes against humanity are established in this case because, first, there was an attack against the civilian population in the Philippines. The attack targeted civilians alleged to be involved in drug-related crimes and other forms of criminality. The Rome Statute crimes alleged in this case formed part of that attack. Second, the attack was widespread and systematic. And third, the attack was carried out pursuant to, or in furtherance of, a state or organisational policy. This policy was to neutralise alleged criminals in the Philippines through violent crimes, including murder. The evidence establishing the contextual elements are set out in paragraphs 71 to 86 of our pre-confirmation brief. In relation to the requirement of an attack, our case is that from at least the 1st of November 2011 to the 16th of March 2019, the Davao Death Squad, or DDS, and/or the National Network carried out an attack which targeted civilians alleged to be criminals. Your Honours have heard from my colleagues how from 2011 until 2016, the attack was concentrated in Davao City. Then, in 2016, when Mr. Duterte became president, he and his co-perpetrators expanded the attack nationwide. They used the national network to do this, which, as Mr. Jeremy has explained, was comprised of state actors, such as law enforcement personnel, as well as non-police assets and hitmen. Your Honours, the locations of the murders contained in counts 1 to 3 of our document containing the charges are indicated on the map on your screens. They include 76 murders, which themselves satisfy the threshold of multiple acts making up a course of conduct. However, as Mr. Nichols has noted, the crimes in count 1 to 3 are representative and emblematic of a larger killing campaign. And the prosecution relies on a range of evidence to establish that the attack was made up of thousands of killings and other violent crimes under Article 7.1. This evidence includes datasets and the statements of documentation actors, the evidence of insider witnesses, expert analysis, and the admissions of Philippine state agencies in their public reporting. I will take Your Honours through some of this evidence now. During Mr. Duterte's mayoral period, hundreds of civilians alleged to be criminals were killed in Davao City. On your screens is a chart with data on extrajudicial killings in Davao based on public reporting. The data is recorded at tab 116. It shows that between 2012 and 2015, there are at least 274 extrajudicial killings in Davao City. This data is corroborated by DDS insider witnesses. Several DDS witnesses say that they each killed hundreds of alleged criminals while with the DDS. Your Honours can see on this slide quotes from one DDS witness. They estimate that, I quote, between 1,500 and 2,000 people, end quote, are buried at Laud Quarry. The quarry was only one of several places that the DDS dumped bodies in and around Davao. That's at tab 37. This witness said that they personally killed hundreds of people. They described their job as the DDS as being, quote, just to kill small criminals, petty criminals. Out of the almost 300 people that I have killed, I never actually got to kill a drug lord, end quote. That's at tab 34. This witness's words make it clear that the target of the attack was people alleged to be criminals in Davao. Your Honours, another DDS witness, who also killed hundreds of people, said that the DDS targeted, I quote, suspected criminals in Davao City, including shabu users and pushers, end quote. That's at tab 58. Your Honours, as you have heard previously, Mr Duterte has himself publicly admitted that he killed around 1,700 people while he was mayor of Davao City. I quote, "They say I killed 700, they undercounted, around 1,700, end quote. That's at tabs 10, 10.1, 10.2. This evidence, the data collected by independent organisations, the statements of insiders on the hundreds of people that they have each killed, and Mr Duterte's own admission of having killed 1,700 people while mayor of Davao, all show that the attack was widespread in the mayoral period. And the attack continued to be widespread after Mr Duterte became president, when it expanded across the country. The victimisation expanded, with the hundreds killed during the mayoral period becoming thousands in the presidential period. Your Honours can see a map of the Philippines on the slide. The colours which will emerge show the locations and density of the killings in the anti-illegal drug campaign. Purple dots indicate an area with 1 to 10 killings, while yellow indicates 500 killings. This is how the killings progressed throughout the presidential period. Your Honours, this map is based on data collected by an independent organisation which recorded at least 5,823 anti-drug killings during the presidential period. This data is recorded at tab 104. The data shows that the attack during the presidential period was widespread. As Your Honours can see from the map, it occurred across the country. It occurred over multiple years, and thousands of civilians were killed. Mr Duterte's administration effectively admitted to the large volume of the attack. They admitted that thousands of individuals were killed in anti-drug operations while Mr Duterte was president. For example, in the Duterte administration's 2017 year-end report, which you can see on your screens, the administration admitted that 3,967 drug personalities died in anti-drug operations in the first year and a half of Mr Duterte's presidency. That's at tab 106. Similarly, the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, or PDEA, admitted that 5,281 drug personalities died in anti-drug operations in the first 2.5 years of Mr Duterte's presidency. This is at tab 98. These admissions corroborate the widespread nature of the attack. They show that thousands of individuals were killed. Your Honours, in addition to being widespread, the attack was also systematic from its origins and throughout the charge period. The features of DDS operations demonstrate this systematicity during the mayoral period. And these features can be found in our brief at paragraphs 35 to 36 and 88 to 98. Insider witnesses described how time and time again, killing operations followed the system set out on the screen. The same hierarchical structure was followed. As Mr Nichols explained, the orders flowed from Mr Duterte at the top, through a combination of other co-perpetrators, to the handler of the relevant DDS team, and finally to the physical perpetrators at the bottom. The DDS teams, composed of police and non-police assets and hitmen who carried out the killings. The features of the killings were also often markedly similar. The identity or whereabouts of the victim was provided to the DDS by an informant. The perpetrators would frequently arrive to or flee the crime scene by motorcycle. They shot or stabbed their victims at close range. The victims were targeted on the basis that they were alleged to be drug users, pushers, or other criminals. And the DDS received a sum of reward money for each kill. When the attack expanded during the presidential period, it continued to be systematic because it remained highly organised, planned, and coordinated. Similar systems to the one I've just described in Davao were deployed during Mr. Duterte's presidency to implement the killings. Your Honours can see some of those features listed on your screens. As in Davao, victims were targeted on the basis that they were alleged to be drug users, pushers, or other criminals. The process for killing the targets was often markedly similar. First, the victims were identified by state actors as targets and listed. As Mr. Jeremy has outlined, high-value targets were often listed on the PRRD list. The targets of barangay clearance operations were often listed on local drug lists, such as local police station lists. Second, targets were killed in the context of so-called law enforcement operations. Police often tried to legitimise the operations, so they would stage a nanlaban or fight-back scenario to make them appear to have been in self-defence. They would also plant evidence, such as drugs and guns, on the victims' bodies. And third, as in Davao, police and those working with them were often paid reward money per kill. Your Honours, these killings were not random or coincidental. Quite the opposite. Targets were pre-identified, listed, and then subject to operations based on that list. This clearly demonstrates the systematicity of the attack. Your Honours, the last point I would like to make about the attack relates to the evidence of an expert witness who specialises in political violence in the Philippines. This expert analysed data relating to armed encounters between the PMP and supposedly armed suspects. He compared data from before Mr. Duterte's presidency to during. And based on this comparison, he found that in the first 25 months of Mr. Duterte's presidency, the number of suspects killed by police increased by 590% across the Philippines. And that finding is at tab 68. Your Honours have heard Mr. Jeremy speak about Bulacan, a province immediately north of Metro Manila, where Mr. Duterte praised the killing of 32 civilians in police operations in 24 hours. The expert witness found that in Bulacan, police killings rose by 1,600% when Mr. Duterte became president, and that's at tab 121. The expert also compared data on Bulacan Police's use of deadly force to other countries and cities across the world. He used the metric of police killings per 100,000 population. The chart on your screens shows this comparison, which is at tab 121 again. The data on Bulacan is orange, while other countries and cities are blue. The orange bar on the left shows police use of deadly force in Bulacan before Mr. Duterte became president. You can see that with a fatality rate of over 1, it was already comparatively high. The orange bar on the right shows the dramatic increase in killings in Bulacan by police after Mr. Duterte became president. The expert concluded that, quote, "The only plausible explanation for such an extreme ratio is a widespread policy of extrajudicial executions. End quote. That's also tab 121. Your Honours, this leads us to the policy requirement for crimes against humanity in Article 7. Your Honours, the attack in this case was carried out pursuant to a policy to neutralise alleged criminals through violent crimes, including murder. The policy was also known as the Davao Formula or model. Your Honours have heard about the origins of the policy in Davao City and how it was implemented by the local executive government. Mr Nichols explained how Mr Duterte, when Mayor of Davao City, established the Davao Death Squad to carry out the policy and kill criminals. The evidence establishing the state or organisational policy in this case is set out at paragraphs 77 to 84 of our brief. As the policy and the common plan were both to neutralise alleged criminals via violent crimes, there is some overlap between the evidence on each. I will set out some of that evidence now while discussing the policy, and then some later while discussing the common plan. The evidence includes Mr Duterte's many public statements and speeches outlining the policy. It also includes the Command Memorandum Circular, which Mr Jeremy mentioned earlier, witness accounts, speeches and statements by other co-perpetrators, sorry, the high level of coordination between state actors, sorry, Your Honours. I will start with Mr Duterte's own speeches. Your Honours, Mr Duterte made no secret of the policy, as is shown by the references in our brief to his many speeches outlining the policy. He made these speeches as Mayor of Davao, as a presidential candidate, and then as President of the Philippines. One example of a speech that Mr Duterte made as Mayor was at a meeting on peace and order in Davao in October 2015. That is tab 13. Thank you.
48 hours yung mga nagdi-distribute ng droga sa Boulevard. Giving you 48 hours. Pag nakita ko kayo, papatayin ko kayo dito.
These are Mr Duterte's own words. I quote, "I will kill you. That's the only formula that worked in my city." End quote. That is tab 133.
Prangka-prangkahan talaga. I will kill you. Kayong na mayor ako ngayon, presidente, yun din ang, that's the only formula that worked in my city.
Your Honours will recall that yesterday, Mr Nichols played a series of Mr Duterte's presidential campaign speeches. I want to take a moment to reflect on some of the key features of those speeches, which are at tabs 8, 12 and 14. First, Mr Duterte frequently said that if elected as president, he would stop drugs and crime in the Philippines in 3 to 6 months. He frequently referenced his experience in Davao, where he admitted that he had killed criminals. He said that if elected, he would order the military and police to do the same nationwide. And he expressly stated that this would entail killing. Your Honours, Mr Duterte's speeches make it clear that there was a policy to neutralise alleged criminals by violent means, including murder. And Mr Duterte was not the only member of the Common Plan who disseminated the policy through public speeches and statements. In this video at tab 9, co-perpetrator Mr De La Rosa addresses a crowd of self-confessed drug addicts in Bacolod City and urges them to kill drug lords and burn their houses.
But on Thursday, National Police Chief Ronald De La Rosa's rhetorics were far from toned down, as he told hundreds of self-confessed drug users and pushers in Bacolod City to kill drug lords.
Kilala mo siguro ninyo kung sino may plano dito. Ano, gusto niyo patayin? Sino patayin? Patayin niyo. Pwede mo kayo pumatay. Pero wala pa kayo walang biktima. Puntahan niyo. Buhusan niyo ng gasolina. Yung bahay, silihan niyo.
Mr De La Rosa made this speech on the 25th of August 2016. At the time, he was the chief of the Philippine National Police. Your Honours, the existence of the policy is also shown by the police directive which Mr Jeremy spoke about earlier, Command Memorandum Circular number 16 of 2016. This is at tab 112. As Your Honours have heard, the day after Mr Duterte became president, he appointed his longtime friend and colleague from Davao, his co-perpetrator, Mr Ronald De La Rosa, as Chief of the Philippine National Police. On the same day, Mr De La Rosa formalised the anti-drugs component of the policy by issuing this directive to the 180,000 police officers under his command. The circular directed police to pursue the neutralisation of illegal drug personalities. As Mr Jeremy has outlined, the evidence shows that within law enforcement, neutralise meant and was understood as meaning to kill. Your Honours, the Command Memorandum Circular shows there was a policy to neutralise through violent crimes such as murder. I will now turn to part 2 of my presentation on Mr Duterte's individual criminal responsibility. The prosecution's evidence on this is set out at paragraphs 5 to 70 of our brief. The prosecution alleges that Mr Duterte indirectly co-perpetrated the crimes, ordered and/or induced the crimes, and/or aided and abetted the crimes. Today, in the interest of time, I will focus on indirect co-perpetration, and we rely on our brief for the other modes of liability. Your Honours, Mr Duterte is an indirect co-perpetrator of the alleged crimes because, first, he agreed to a common plan to neutralise alleged criminals. Second, he and his fellow co-perpetrators jointly controlled a structure of power, namely the Davao Death Squad and the National Network, which they used to pursue the common plan. Third, Mr Duterte made an essential contribution to the crimes within the framework of the common plan. And fourth, he did this with the requisite intent. Your Honours can see on your screens an excerpt from paragraph 4 of our document containing the charges. This sets out the scope of the common plan. The plan was to neutralise alleged criminals in the Philippines, including those perceived or alleged to be associated with drug use, sale or production through violent crimes, including murder. As Mr Nichols has explained, Mr Duterte and his co-perpetrators agreed to this plan in Davao City. Photos of the co-perpetrators in Davao City are displayed on your screens. They're a combination of trusted police officers, an individual from Mr Duterte's mayoral office, an officer from the National Bureau of Investigation in Davao Region, and a lawyer who acted on behalf of certain members of the Davao Death Squad. In 2016, when Mr Duterte became president, the members of the Common Plan remained largely the same. They were joined by a further two individuals, a senior police officer and a long-time colleague of the group from Davao City, who had worked with the DDS before the jurisdictional period. I will take your honours through some of the evidence which shows both the scope of the Common Plan and the co-perpetrators' agreement to it. In the interest of time, I will address some co-perpetrators and we rely on our brief for the rest. That's at paragraphs 9 to 23 of our brief. On your screens is a photograph of Mr Ronald De La Rosa. When Mr De La Rosa was Davao City Police Chief, he developed Tokhang operations. As your honours have heard from Mr Jeremy, Tokhang was a blueprint for police to implement killings later in the presidential period. When he was announced as Mr Duterte's chosen PMP chief in May 2016, Mr De La Rosa gave this interview, which is at tab 101. It shows that he wholeheartedly agreed to the Common Plan.
Patayan sa drugs. Patayan talaga ito sa drugs. Kaya kayong mga drug lord dyan, humanda na kayo at talagang sasagasaan ko kayo.
On this slide is a photo of Isidro La Peña. Like Mr De La Rosa, Mr La Peña was well known to Mr Duterte because he too had worked as Davao City Police Chief. In his case, from 1996 until 1998. In 2016, Mr Duterte appointed Mr La Peña as Director General of the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, or PDEA. PDEA is the lead anti-drug enforcement agency in the Philippines. 2 days after Mr La Peña took his oath, he gave a speech to his PDEA subordinates. There is an excerpt from that speech on the slide. Quote, "Under then Mayor, we implemented strict law enforcement against illegal drug activities in Davao City. The President wants to replicate and expand what is being done in Davao. And that is precisely what I intend to do." End quote. That's tab 101. Also like Mr De La Rosa, Vicente Danao was Davao City Police Chief during the mayoral period, in his case from 2013 to 2016. In November 2018, he was appointed Police Chief of Manila Police District, and he told reporters, quote, "If I discover anyone involved in drugs, especially those who distribute or just throw them around, son of a bitch, I will go after you, goddamn. I will kill you. Blatantly, I am saying that. Sons of bitches." End quote. That's tab 96. When Mr Duterte became president, he appointed Vitaliano Aguirre II as Secretary of Justice. Mr Aguirre has also publicly acknowledged the Common Plan and his agreement to it as a member of Mr Duterte's administration.
Well, which do you want? We build first we build the prison facilities first, or do we go against these people? Choose. If you're in the Philippines, we will choose to kill these drug lords.
Quote, "In the Philippines, we will choose to kill these drug lords." End quote. That's tab 125. Your Honours, these speeches of co-perpetrators show both the scope of the Common Plan and those co-perpetrators' agreement to it. Your Honours, the next element of indirect co-perpetration is control of a structure of power. In the mayoral period, Mr Duterte and his co-perpetrators controlled the DDS, which they used to pursue the Common Plan. There is a diagram of the DDS hierarchy on your screens. As the Mayor of Davao City, Mr Duterte sat at the apex of the formal and city structures. The law gave him formal operational, supervision and control over the police in Davao City. In addition to this de jure power, insider witnesses spoke about his de facto power over police and the DDS structure. Under Mr. Duterte were a combination of co-perpetrators from the Davao City Police Office and the Mayor's Office. Together with Mr. Duterte, they controlled the DDS teams beneath them. They controlled the will of the DDS perpetrators through a range of mechanisms. And these are set out in paragraph 38 of our brief and include threats to kill and actual killing. To illustrate this control, there are quotes from one witness on your screen. This witness said that when he was first told to kill, he did not want to. But, I quote, "I felt like I didn't have any other choice but to follow their orders. Duterte is the most powerful person in Davao City, and you had to do what he wanted. It wasn't possible not to not obey his command." End quote. This is tab 51. When Mr. Duterte became president, the co-perpetrators continued to control a structure of power. One of the first things that Mr. Duterte did with his new presidential powers was to appoint his co-perpetrators from Davao to national positions in government and law enforcement, which were key to the common plan. And after he appointed Mr. De La Rosa as chief of the PMP, Mr. De La Rosa used his new powers to move other police co-perpetrators into key policing roles. These new appointments expanded the geographic powers of the co-perpetrators and allowed them to create a larger network of individuals they controlled. Your Honours can see that structure of power on the chart on your screens. The co-perpetrators controlled the executive, they controlled the police, they controlled the Drug Enforcement Agency, the National Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Justice. And they used this control to ensure that their subordinates carried out the plan to neutralise alleged criminals through violent crimes. For example, as PMP chief, Mr. De La Rosa now controlled some 180,000 police officers who, as you have heard, he directed to neutralise drug personalities. Mr. La Peña now controlled 1,800 Philippine drug enforcement personnel. They used these subordinates as physical perpetrators to commit the crimes. Mr. Aguirre, as Secretary of Justice, now had control of the National Prosecution Service. He used this control to ensure that, except for a handful of low-level perpetrators in notorious cases, the crimes were not prosecuted, and a climate of impunity prevailed. And the co-perpetrators controlled the will of the physical perpetrators. As in Davao City, low-level members of the national network risked losing their jobs or being killed if they did not comply. For example, Your Honours can see the evidence of a police insider on your screens. He said that if his boss did not kill enough people during police operations, he would lose his post and be replaced. I quote, "We were told that there should be 5 to 10 deaths per month. The regional director called him and told him that if there were no deaths or no recorded killings, then he would be relieved of his duty." End quote. That's tab 124. Now on your screens is the evidence of an individual who police suspected of involvement in drugs. He surrendered to police to avoid being killed. The police held his status as an alleged drug pusher against him and recruited him as an asset. They made him kill other civilians who were alleged to be involved with drugs. He said, quote, "I surrendered myself to them. I knew that they wanted to kill me, so I became an asset of theirs, end quote. That's at tab 22. Your Honours, I will now turn to the requirement of an essential contribution. Mr. Duterte made an essential contribution to the crimes within the framework of the Common Plan. And the prosecution has set out 10 of Mr. Duterte's contributions in our brief at paragraphs 44 to 58. Many of these have been discussed in the prosecution's presentations. For example, Mr. Nichols spoke about how Mr. Duterte designed and disseminated the policy in this case, which is point A on the slide. He also spoke about point B, how Mr. Duterte established and oversaw the DDS. I have just addressed point E, on the appointment of key personnel to positions which were crucial to the execution of the crimes. Mr. Jeremy has spoken about point J, how Mr. Duterte publicly named so-called high-value targets who were then killed. And all members of the prosecution have touched upon point H, Mr. Duterte's public statements authorising, condoning and encouraging killing. Your Honours, without Mr. Duterte's essential contribution, the crimes in this case would not have been committed, or they would have been committed in a significantly different way. We can see this in the evidence of low-level members of the Davao Death Squad and the National Network, who said that Mr. Duterte's conduct had a causal effect on their perpetration of the crimes. You can see on the screens, one low-level perpetrator during the mayoral period said, I quote, "I was confident to continue killing people because anyway, we wouldn't be arrested for that," end quote. That's tab 38. A low-level police perpetrator during the presidential period was asked about the impact Mr. Duterte's public speeches had on his team, including when deciding to kill someone. He responded, quote, "It did have an effect on me because it's like I was saying to myself, well, even the president, he himself is ready to do something like this, and who am I?" End quote. That's tab 142. A senior police officer during the presidential period was asked why his police unit started killing in July 2016. He responded, I quote, "Because of the directive of the president," end quote. That's tab 120. Your Honours, from everything you have heard over the past 2 days, there can be no doubt about Mr. Duterte's knowledge and intent. Mr. Duterte meant to engage in the conduct that has been charged in this case. He intended that the crimes would be committed, and he was aware that they would be committed as a result of implementing the Common Plan. Mr. Duterte knew about the fundamental features of the Davao Death Squad and the National Network that enabled the co-perpetrators to control the physical perpetrators. And he was aware of the factual circumstances that enabled the co-perpetrators to control the crimes. Mr. Duterte knew because he himself established the DDS to kill people. He repeatedly broadcast his intention to implement the Common Plan nationally if elected president. He made it clear that this would involve killing. Once he was president, he moved his trusted co-perpetrators from Davao into key national positions. And as the number of killings rose, Mr. Duterte persisted with the Common Plan. He praised the 32 killings in a one-time big-time operation in Bulacan. He publicly named so-called high-value targets. He promised to protect police. And as Your Honours have heard, Mr. Duterte has admitted to many of these things. Your Honours, I will conclude my presentation by recalling two items. The first is Mr Duterte's presidential campaign promise that he would stop drugs and crime in the Philippines within 3 to 6 months. And the second is the spread of killings during the first 6 months of Mr Duterte's presidency.
I promise you, hindi naman believe yung ibang tao. Sabi ko, I would stop drugs and crime, criminality in 3 to 6 months.
That concludes the prosecution's submissions on the merits. Thank you, Your Honours.
Josh Motach. Thank you very much. Am I to understand that you have finished with the presentations on the merits?
Honors, yes, that is correct.
You know that you still have some time, right?
Hopefully been efficient, and we have finished now. Thank you.
Donc maintenant, je donne...
Now, I'll give the floor to the legal representatives of the victims for their submissions on the merits. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam President. Our presentation shall be in two parts. I will start with my presentation, and my colleague Andres will conclude later on. And just to be sure, I have 30 minutes. Is that correct? Answer correct. Thank you.
Madam President, Your Honours, we speak today on behalf of thousands of victims and surviving families who have suffered immeasurable harm under the so-called anti-drug campaign conducted during the administration of the suspect, former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. We speak for families who cannot be here, mothers who buried their sons, children who lost their parents, the spouses who now raise families alone, and communities that have lived for years under fear and silence, and that continue to bear the consequences of violence that swept through their neighborhoods like a storm. These victims appear today before you not as mere statistics or distant figures or images in report as pictured yesterday by the defense, but as human beings whose rights under the Rome Statute have been violated in the most profound ways. These proceedings relate to what has been labeled the Duterte's war on drugs and Duterte's bloody war on drugs. However, the campaign, as I will refer to it during my presentation, was less about combating the drug trade itself and more about policing poverty and social inequality. As the evidence on the record unequivocally shows, individuals targeted by Mr. Duterte anti-drug operations overwhelmingly came from impoverished communities where social mobility is limited and opportunities are scarce. Drug use, particularly methamphetamine, locally known as shabu, is often more prevalent in such low-income settings where people may turn to substances as a coping mechanism for their harsh living conditions. In these communities, structural conditions, including the absence of adequate mental health services, limited access to quality education, scarce employment opportunities, and the chronic stress associated with poverty, create an environment in which substance use is more likely to emerge. Therefore, patterns of drug use do not arise in a vacuum. They reflect deeper systemic inequalities and long-standing patterns of socio-economic marginalization. The campaign disproportionately affected the poor and marginalized, especially in urban informal settlements marked by high levels of poverty. While the rhetoric of war focused on eradicating drug dealers and users, it was the most vulnerable members of society, those with the least power and resources, were caught in the crossfire. A significant number of the ones killed had little or no criminal history and were often accused of minor drug-related conduct or perceived drug use by the authorities. These were people living in poverty, were treated as expendable by a system that failed to prioritize their protection and to address the structural conditions underlying their struggles. Rather than addressing the root causes of drug addiction, such as poverty, lack of education, unemployment, and inequality, the Duterte administration framed the issue as a criminal one, focusing on punitive enforcement over social responses. Mr. Duterte's response was a selective, violent crackdown of the most vulnerable, recasting conditions of marginalizations as grounds for criminal targeting, rather as manifestations of social injustice. Framed on its face as a campaign against illegal drugs, it in reality reflected broader social political dynamics, including the targeting of marginalized communities, the use of state violence, and the deflection of attention from deeper structural problems. Mr. Duterte is charged under Article 7(1)(a of the Rome Statute with the crimes against humanity of murder and attempted murder allegedly committed between 1st November 2011 and 16 March 2019 in or around Davao City during the period in which he was mayor of the town, and across the Republic of the Philippines during his term as president of the country. The prosecution presented ample evidence showing that each of the contextual elements of crimes against humanity is satisfied at the required threshold for confirming the charges. During the period covered by the charges, the Davao Death Squad and the national network created by Mr. Duterte to commit the crimes carried out an attack against the civilian population within the meaning of Article 7(2)(a) of the statute, as reflected in a course of conduct involving the commission of multiple murders and attempted murders. The victims' accounts of events corroborate the prosecution evidence and show that the crimes they suffered were not spontaneous or isolated acts of violence, but rather a planned, directed, and organized attack against them. The attack was massive, carried out collectively with considerable seriousness, and directed against a multiplicity of civilians. The victims were all civilians. The repeated lethal operations were conducted in residential and other civilian settings. As already indicated, the victims largely came from marginalized communities, were suspected by the authorities of involvement in criminal, often drug-related activities, and together with their families, they were targeted in their homes and neighborhoods. The attack was widespread and systematic, and we refer, Your Honor, to Annex D and E of the prosecution pre-trial brief. The attack was widespread because of its large-scale nature and the number of victims. In this regard, the number of victims affected by the events within the charges is one of the most relevant factors to be taken into consideration for the purpose of determining under the chapeau of Article 7.1 of the statute whether the attack was widespread or systematic. The broad geographical spread of the victimization, combined with a significant number of victims, confirm the wide scope of the attack. As the prosecution has made clear yesterday and today, the instances of murders and attempted murders in the document containing the charges and in the pre-trial brief are simply illustrative of a much broader pattern of victimization. In fact, the actual scale of victimization extends well beyond the 49 incidents affecting 78 victims presented by the prosecution. The prosecution itself referred to thousands of civilians murdered. And we recall here the content of paragraph 73 of the prosecution pre-trial brief, as well as the remarks by Ms. Croft just 15, 20 minutes ago. As reported by Human Rights Watch in a report published in 2022, since 2016, the Philippine police have admitted its involvement in the death of more than 6,200 people in drug raids across the country. In a 2020 report, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights reported 8,663 deaths occurred in the drug war. The Human Rights Commission of the Philippines and domestic human rights group report death tolls that are 2 to 3 times higher than the UN figure. The attack was also systematic, well-planned, and well executed, following a standard modus operandi. In many cases, it began with an individual receiving a visit or a phone call from an official from the local barangay, informing them that they were on a drug watch list drawn up by barangay officials and the police. In practice, these visits function less as warnings than as a means of confirming the identity and whereabouts of the intended target. As one victim reported, I quote, "A barangay official told my husband to surrender to the police because he was on the watch list as a drug user. He had given up drug use months earlier, so didn't go. 2 weeks later, 3 armed masked men wearing bulletproof vests arrived at our home in Manila and handcuffed him. I could hear my husband begging for his life from outside the room. We were crying, and the other armed men threatened to kill us as well. Moments later, my husband was shot dead." End of quote. Survivors, relatives, and neighbors consistently recount that armed men typically work in groups of 2, 4, or a dozen. They wore either police uniform or civilian clothes, often all black, with their face concealed by balaclava-style headgear, masks, baseball caps, or helmets. They carried handguns. As one victim explained, and I quote, "On 6 June 2017, at about 9:45 in the evening, I was at home with my husband, and our children were sleeping upstairs. 4 unidentified men wearing helmets and bonnets arrived at home looking for my husband. They broke down the front door. I started begging them to spare the life of my husband. The men pushed me away. My husband was shot in the chest and fell face down. While lying face down, he was shot 5 more times in the nape and head. The children woke up terrified because of the gunshots. End of quote. Attackers frequently travel by motorcycle, typically with two individuals on a single bike. Often a van, invariably white or black, and at times bearing markings associated with police vehicles was also present. They banged on doors and barged into rooms. The attackers did not identify themselves or provide warrants. Family members report hearing beatings and their loved ones begging for their lives. And I quote again from the recollection of one of the victims. 5 masked armed men broke into our house in Bulacan province where my father was playing cards. We could see him kneeling in a surrendering position. The men grabbed him and slammed him into a concrete wall several times. And then, just they throw him outside. We saw the shooting. We were just there. My father's face was bleeding from being hit, and he was begging them for mercy when he was shot. End of quote. Another victim explained, quote, my father collapsed to the floor but still tried to move, begging for his life. Yet the man continued shooting him. I couldn't count how many times I was so afraid. We also heard successive gunshots from outside. Later we found that also 2 of our neighbors were killed. End of quote. The shooting could happen immediately, behind closed doors or in the street, or the victims would be taken away by the gunman only for shots to be heard minutes later and the body to be discovered by local residents. At times, bodies were dumped elsewhere, sometimes with hands tied or heads wrapped in plastic. Relatives typically found them after being alerted by policemen or by the neighbors. A victim recalled, quote, 6 masked armed men broke into the house where a small group, including several teenagers, were watching television. The men arrested and beat 2 young boys they believed were drug suspects, and then took them away on motorcycles. A half hour later, after hearing from a uniformed policeman, we, referring to the relatives, rushed to a nearby bridge to find their bodies, both with gunshot wounds to the head, their hands tied with cloth. The gunmen were still at the scene, while uniformed police cordoned off the area. Another victim recounted, quote, a week after his brother was killed, 10 police officers, some in civilian clothes, arrested my other son and took him to the local barangay office. That evening, masked armed men abducted him from the barangay office. Shortly afterwards, his body was found under a bridge a block away. When we found him, we saw that his entire head had been wrapped in packing tape and his hands had been tied behind his back. He had been shot execution style through the mouth. End of quote. And another one, quote, the body seemed like it was just thrown out. The nails were removed, one eyeball was missing, stuffed by cotton. End of quote. Relatives and witnesses often saw uniformed police in the immediate surroundings of the incident securing the perimeter. Special crime scene investigators typically arrived within minutes. In numerous cases, an unregistered 38 or 45 caliber gun and a packet of shabu were found placed beside the body. And instead of fleeing from the police, the gunman would mingle with them. As one of the victims described, I quote, "On 7 June 2018 in the morning, I was at home when I saw my son coming back from his work on the opposite side of the street. Suddenly, I saw 8 policemen, 3 in uniform and 3 in civilian clothes. 2 of them crossed the street. They took my son and banged his head against the wall. They accused him of selling shabu. He denied. He was then taken to the door of the house. He was shouting, 'Mama, help me!' I took a piece of wood and hit one policeman. Suddenly, one policeman pointed the gun against my son. He shot twice, at the head and at the chest. While in shock, I saw one police officer placing 4 packets of shabu and a gun around the body of my son." End of quote. The same account of another victim who simply recalled, "After the shooting of my son, who was only 19, uniformed police showed me his body in the house and a 45 caliber handgun next to his body. I told them that my son could not afford and did not possess a gun, and therefore could not possibly have attempted to shoot at the police. I said he cannot even pay the rent. His sister paid the rent for him." End of quote. On occasions, victims were still alive when found by the relatives and taken to the hospital, where they later succumbed to their injuries. Survivors recount the terror and enduring feeling of still being hunted as follows, and I quote, "In September 2016, a police officer pretending to be a commuter boarded my tricycle. He asked me to pass by the police station. There, I was stopped by a group of men who turned to be police officers. I was taken to the precinct, beaten, and forced to reveal the identity of drug pushers. I didn't know. Later that evening, I was taken to a dark place and shot multiple times. Despite the injuries, I managed to escape and save my life. I still have the consequence of the injuries, and I feel deep sadness, anger, and fear of being caught again." End of quote. Another survivor explained, quote, "They killed my 4 friends kneeling and defenseless. I heard a barrage of gunshots, voices, and one officer saying, 'Let it be. Let's say they fought back and let's leave the evidence.' I lay next to one of my friends pretending to be dead. When the armed officer left, I crawled out of the room and headed towards the edge of the ravine. Holding my chest with one hand to stop the bleeding, I slid downwards and fell to the creek bed. I crossed it, climbed the hill on the other side, and walked toward the highway. There, I encountered someone I knew and desperately begged for help." End of quote. Although the charges concern only the crimes of murder and attempted murder, victims' accounts also reveal widespread acts of torture, ill treatment, and rape. Young people were particularly exposed to torture and cruel and inhuman treatments, including unlawful arrest. A number of victims participating in these proceedings were minor when they were attempted to be killed, and a number of victims participating in the proceedings recount the killing of their nephew, son, cousin, who was under 18 at the age of killing. and this morning Mr. Jeremy provided the example of Kian de los Santos, who was 17 at the time of his killing. Reported forms of torture include beating, kicking, slapping, blows to the head, electrocution, and death threats. On several occasions, law enforcement officials used arrests, inclusion in the drug watch list, and drug-related accusations as a tool of coercion to perpetrate rape and other forms of sexual violence. In September 2018, a young boy was taken by the police and brought to the precinct. His mother recounted, I quote, "At the precinct, he was repeatedly coerced into confessing a crime he was accused of. If you don't admit, your life will be the price," they threatened him. When he refused to confess, he was beaten with a gun and electrocuted. On the night of 16 September 2018, between 9 and 10, I received a phone call from my cousin urging me to go in a certain location in Manila. What I saw was a nightmare. My son had been discarded like an animal, his lifeless body lying on the boulevard, abandoned like a fish by the roadside. I rushed to the scene, but I was blocked by the police. I was not even allowed to touch or embrace my son's body. Even in death, my son was not treated with dignity. It was like they just threw my son out like a pig. I finally found him at the funeral home, where I had to pay to recover the body. I had nothing. I was bargaining as if I were buying fish. In the end, I paid approximately 45,000 pesos to take my son's body for burial. Now I wonder, will justice ever be served?
Excuse me, Counsel, you have 5 minutes left.
Official police reports of these incidents invariably invoked self-defense to justify the killings, despite eyewitness accounts that portray the killings as cold-blooded murders of unarmed individuals. To bolster their claims, the police routinely planted guns, spent ammunition, and drug packets beside the bodies. While these official accounts contrasted markedly with the ones provided by relatives, they were notably consistent among themselves, typically characterized the incidents as by-bust anti-drug operation, differing little besides the names, places, and dates. The victim was invariably described as a dealer who attempted to sell to undercover officers conducting a buy-bust operation. Specialized local anti-drug units, called Station Anti-Illegal Drug Special Operation Task Units, were usually involved. According to the reports, the victim, after being put under arrest, often uncuffed, allegedly pulled out a weapon and sought to shoot the police. In every case, the victim was killed, and none of the arresting officers were armed. In most cases, the police reporting having found shabu on or near the victim's corpse, and sometimes a gun. Often, after the killing, the bodies of the victims were brought directly to the funeral parlors. Families then had to start their calvary to find the body of their loved ones, and they had to pay high fees to retrieve the bodies. R/50082/25 had to sell the house to be able to pay for her brother's funeral and burial. Sometimes the bodies were instead left on the street or thrown into the water in a plastic bag. I believe it's a good time to stop for the flow of the speech. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Merci beaucoup, Maître.
Thank you very much, Ms. Masida. The hearing is now suspended and we shall resume at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.